Today's story begins with two stepbrothers. Two stepbrothers lived very different lives. Joel had just come out of jail, but he had not changed. He still stole, wandered on the streets, and wasted his days. He had many bad habits. Whenever he fought with someone, he would accuse them of racism, using his skin color as a weapon. Jack, on the other hand, was very different. He was mixed, half black and half white. He had a stable job, had married a white woman, and lived in a wealthy, mostly white neighborhood. Jack avoided black communities because he did not want anyone to laugh at him or think less of him. The brothers had been apart for years, living completely separate lives. One day, both received a call. Their father was on his deathbed. He wanted his sons to be with him in his final moments. The brothers had no choice but to go. They met at the airport after 20 long years. Jack tried to avoid Joel because he was ashamed of being seen with him, but Joel kept following, forcing conversation. When Jack began boasting about his life and success, Joel felt small. To cover his pain, he lied, saying he too had bought a penthouse in Paris and would soon live there. After a short trip, they reached their old village and stepped into their ancestral home. Many people had gathered around. Their father lay weak in the center of the room. A woman was sitting beside him. It was their aunt. Their father's tired eyes lit up when he saw his sons. In his fading voice, he said he wanted to give them a treasure. The brothers leaned closer, greedy with curiosity. But the treasure was not what they expected. Their father handed them an old government paper. He explained that their ancestors had earned it through noble deeds. The paper gave them the right to move freely in an age when white people bought and sold black people as slaves. To him, it was a symbol of freedom and dignity, a reminder of how far their family had come. Moments later, he breathed his last. The brothers stared at the paper. To them, it felt useless now. Times had changed. Nobody was a slave anymore. Frustrated and disappointed, they tore the paper and let the pieces fly into the air. Their aunt, watching silently, grew furious. She took a deep drag from her cigar and blew the smoke directly onto their faces, as if cursing them for throwing away not just a paper, but the sacrifice and history of their ancestors. When the brothers opened their eyes again, they were no longer in the house. Instead, they found themselves standing in the middle of a wide mustard field. The air smelled sharp and bitter, and far away they saw two half-naked men running desperately, as if their lives were in danger. Joel's eyes widened. "They're black," he whispered to himself. "That's why someone wants to kill them." Without thinking, he too began to run. Jack, however, stayed where he was. Deep inside, he never truly accepted himself as black. He believed he belonged to the white world and that no harm would come to him. But soon, two men on horses galloped up, their whips cracking in the air. One of them shouted, "What are you doing here? This place is not for you." Before Jack could even explain, they threw him into a wooden cage where Joel was already locked up. Joel, holding an old phone he had somehow found in his pocket, pressed record. "I'll upload this," he said angrily. "The world must see how even today black people are hunted and oppressed." Jack, on the other hand, thought this must be some mistake. Maybe these men were border police. He raised his hands and said, "Listen, I am an American citizen. I have a good job. I live in a white neighborhood. Let me go." Soon they were dragged to a strange market. But it wasn't a market for vegetables or animals. It was a market for humans. The brothers saw people lined up like cattle and rich white buyers pointing fingers and calling out prices. Their hearts froze when they realized they too were up for sale. Joel tried to laugh nervously. This must be some kind of movie set. "Look, we don't know how to act. Please let us go." But his words were silenced by a sharp slap and cruel laughter. One by one, other people were bought, but no one wanted them. Buyers complained that Jack was too overweight and Joel's breath smelled foul. Humiliated, the brothers looked at each other. Joel puffed up his chest, trying to look strong, while Jack tried to stand tall. Finally, a landowner named Jordan stepped forward. He agreed to buy both of them together for the price of one. Jordan dragged them to his farm, where dozens of other slaves were already working. The place smelled of sweat, dust, and hopelessness. Overseeing everything was a cruel supervisor, a man who enjoyed punishing slaves more than feeding them. Joel was pushed into the fields, his dark skin making him an easy choice for heavy labor under the burning sun. Jack, lighter-skinned, was sent inside the house to help with domestic work. There he was made to assist a young girl named Roswell in the kitchen, but Jack could not control his anger. "What is this nonsense?" he shouted. "I'm not a slave. I'm a share broker. I have money, a car, a house. Why should I do this dirty work?" His voice echoed through the kitchen, but no one listened. For the first time, Jack realized that in this place, none of his achievements, none of his wealth, none of his pride had any value. Meanwhile, Joel was also suffering badly. He was whipped, insulted, and made to work until his hands bled. Tired of the cruelty, one day he shouted back in anger. Everyone turned to stare at him. Henry, the cruel overseer, only laughed loudly. "This one has lost his mind," he sneered, while the others joined in mocking Joel's pain. That evening, as everyone sat at the long wooden table for dinner, Jack noticed something strange. The clothes, the food, the way people behaved. It was nothing like the time he came from. Slowly it dawned on him. They weren't in the modern world anymore. They were in the past, back in the 18th century, a time when slavery was common, when people with dark skin were treated like animals, beaten without reason, and given scraps to eat. Later that night, Jack and Joel found each other and spoke quietly in the shadows. Joel's voice trembled with rage. "We're not in our time. We've somehow traveled to the past." Jack nodded, realizing the truth. Neither of them understood how it had happened, but one thing was certain: they couldn't stay here. They decided to run away. But when they tried to escape through the forest, they were stopped in their tracks. Strange figures appeared in the dark, tribals with painted faces, holding spears. The brothers froze, fear gripping their hearts. Not knowing what these people might do, they turned back to the farm, defeated. The next day, Henry gathered all the slaves and marched them to a church. A priest stood at the front, holding a large Bible. He began to read out verses, claiming that God himself had given white men the right to enslave black people, and that the Bible proved it. Most of the slaves listened silently, unable to read, unable to question. But Jack raised his head. "That is not what's written," he said firmly. The priest smirked, certain Jack was bluffing. He held out the Bible and said, "Then read it yourself." He was sure Jack couldn't, but Jack read it aloud, clearly and confidently. The real verses spoke of love, of equality, of compassion, not slavery. The crowd gasped. The priest's face turned pale. Without another word, he hurried away, humiliated, his lies exposed. Jordan, the landowner, had been watching all of this. When he saw that Jack could read and write, he was impressed. "From today," he declared, "you will no longer work in the fields. You will work as a supervisor." Like Henry, Jack's face lit up with pride. At last, he felt recognized. At last, he felt above the others. His chest swelled, and slowly his heart began to change. Now he believed he truly was different. He no longer saw himself as a slave like the rest. But this pride twisted him. Soon he began to take out his authority on Joel. He gave him the hardest tasks, the dirtiest work, showing no mercy. Joel finally broke down. "You're so busy licking their boots that you've forgotten we're brothers," he cried. But Jack ignored him. He had power now, and he wasn't ready to give it up. Henry, however, didn't like this new situation. A slave becoming smarter, rising higher than him, it burned his pride. Jealousy grew inside him. "Be careful," he warned Jack in a low, dangerous voice. One day, Joel arrived late to the farm. Henry seized the chance. His face darkened with rage, and he unleashed his anger, shouting and threatening Joel in front of everyone. Not long after, Jordan and his family discovered that one of their slaves, Jack, could read and write. Curious, they called him into the big hall. At first, they mocked him, asking him to read silly lines, laughing as he obeyed. Then Jordan's wife sneered, "If you can read, maybe you can play the piano too." Jack sat down, placed his hands on the keys, and to everyone's surprise, music filled the room. The family stared in disbelief. How could a slave know something so refined? Feeling a spark of confidence, Jack forgot himself. He laughed lightly and placed his hand on the landlord's shoulder, as if speaking to an equal. The room went silent. Then Jordan's face turned red with fury. "Burn him with coal," he ordered. The punishment was brutal. Jack screamed as the hot coal scorched his skin. Humiliated, he finally realized the truth. No matter how educated, how skilled, or how intelligent he was, in this century, he was seen as nothing more than an animal. Far in the distance, hidden in smoke, the same man appeared again. She sat calmly, smoking a cigar, as if she had been watching everything unfold from the beginning. But how did she get here? The brothers could not understand. Joel, restless and furious, tried to run away several times, but every attempt ended in failure. Then one day at last, an opportunity came. A Jewish businessman who often visited the farm took pity on the brothers. He hid them in his cart and carried them away. For the first time in months, they felt freedom again. The landlord's son happened to see them escaping, but he said nothing to Henry. He had always hated the cruelty of slavery and secretly wished to end it. The businessman gave the brothers shelter in his home. He offered them warm food and drink. Tears filled their eyes as they ate, grateful to finally feel human again. But Jack was still puzzled. "Why are you doing this for us?" he asked. The man sighed. "Because my people too have suffered. In Europe, Jews are hunted, mocked, treated as less than human." Jack frowned. "But still, we black people suffer more than anyone else." The man shook his head. "Suffering has no measure. Pain is pain." Just then, Joel muttered a name. "Adolf." The businessman stopped. "Adolf? Who is that?" Jack gave a small laugh. "A man with a tiny mustache and a side-part haircut. But forget it, you wouldn't know." Before Jack could explain further, loud noises echoed outside. Angry voices, boots on the ground. The brothers panicked and ran away again, disappearing into the night. But the businessman stood still, his mind turning over the strange name. Adolf. Adolf. He would not understand now, but in 100 years, his people would remember that name forever, and they would never forget. After running all night through the thick jungle, the brothers finally reached the seashore. The salty wind hit their faces, and to their surprise, they saw a small boat tied to the rocks. Without thinking, They jumped inside, pushed it into the water, and rowed away. Behind them, the landlord's hunters reached the shore, shouting and waving their weapons. Joel raised his hand, showing them his thumb as if to mock them, while Jack kept rowing hard. For the first time, freedom felt close, but luck betrayed them again. As they sailed farther, they came across a giant ship. Its dark hull loomed like a monster over the waves. Looking closely, they saw the terrible truth. It was a slave ship, packed with people chained together, brought from distant lands. Before they could even react, they were captured and dragged aboard. And soon, once again, they were back in the same slave market, standing on a wooden platform, up for auction. And, cruelly enough, the very same two men they had escaped from earlier bought them again. As their captors rested in a forest camp, the bushes around them rustled. Out came the same fierce tribals the brothers had once feared. This time, instead of attacking, the warriors struck down the hunters and freed Joel and Jack. Their leader stepped forward and declared, "We fight to end slavery. No chain will remain unbroken." Hearing this, Joel's spirit lit up. Both brothers began shouting slogans of freedom with the group, happy to be part of their cause. But then the leader raised his hand and said, "To end slavery, we must kill the white masters, the men, their wives, even their children." Joel froze. "No," he said. "Their wives and children are innocent." But the others didn't like his answer. Their eyes turned cold, and soon the very people who had freed them began to chase them. Once again, the brothers found themselves running for their lives. Their bodies were exhausted, their spirits broken. They collapsed under a tree and fell asleep. By morning, when their eyes opened, they were shocked to see a familiar figure. It was the same old aunt who had been sitting beside their dying father at the beginning. She was calmly smoking a cigar, watching them with sharp eyes. At once, the brothers understood. This woman was no ordinary aunt. She had power. It was she who had sent them into this terrible past. They fell at her feet and begged, "Please forgive us. Please send us back to our own time." The aunt took a deep drag from her cigar and exhaled slowly. "You were insulted, whipped, treated like animals. Now you know what your ancestors faced. Now you understand your mistake. But if you want to return, you must solve my riddle." She leaned closer and whispered, "You must combine Rosie Wally and Isadar, and you must give up the smoke of the cigar." The brothers looked at each other in confusion. What did those names mean? What was the puzzle? Before they could ask, the aunt vanished into thin air, leaving behind only her half-burnt cigar. With no other choice, they picked it up and wandered back to the farm. There, the punishment for their repeated escape attempts awaited them. Hot iron rods were pressed against their hips, leaving them scarred and in agony. Their bodies burned so much that they could not even sit down. One day, the landlord's son came to check on Jack and Joel. He looked at Jack and said kindly, "Boys like you are the future of America. One day, all of this will end. One day, there will even be a black president in this country. Just wait and see." That night, a big party was held at Jordan's house. Taking advantage of the chaos, Joel and Jack stole a lot of liquor and gave it to the other slaves. Soon, everyone was drunk and celebrating. During this time, they also managed to bring Rosie and Isgar together, which meant the only thing left to do was light the cigar to return home. But Joel had another idea. "Why don't we take some revenge before leaving?" he suggested. Jack agreed. Armed with sharp weapons, they stormed into the house. They kissed white women against their will, smashed things, and caused chaos. Suddenly, Henry arrived with a gun. But instead of being afraid, Joel and Jack laughed in his face, confident that they were about to leave. They lit the cigar and blew out the smoke, but nothing happened. This time, there would be no escape. The punishment was death. The brothers were locked in a dungeon overnight, awaiting execution. In the darkness, they hugged each other and cried, knowing they would not survive. The next morning, they were brought to the gallows. The rope was ready and Henry prepared to hang them. But just before he could, Isador appeared from behind and struck Henry on the head. "Run!" he shouted. The brothers fled as fast as they could, but on their way they came to a river. There they saw the landlord's young son drowning. Without thinking, Jack jumped in to save him, but in doing so, he was caught once again. Now friends, here the story takes its final turn. Even the landlord was tired of punishing Joel and Jack again and again. He wanted to see them hanged, but his own son begged for their lives. Finally, the landlord gave in. He handed over the official papers, stamped with his seal, that declared no one could ever make them slaves again. With these papers, they were free to go wherever they wished. Joel shouted with joy, laughing and doing strange dances as if a heavy weight had finally lifted. But Jack held the papers close and said softly, "I will accept this freedom only if Rosie Wally and Isadar are freed along with us." After a pause, the landlord agreed. When they stepped outside, Joel's happiness turned into anger. He yelled at Jack, "Because of you, We had a chance to escape forever, but now we are still stuck in this place of slavery." But Jack shook his head. "For you, freedom means running back to our own time. But for them, for all of us, freedom means life itself." Soon Isdar and Rosavelli received the papers. They wept with gratitude, thanked the brothers, and disappeared into the night. Joel and Jack felt a strange peace, but before long, Henry appeared again, his cruel smile unchanged. "Now you will work harder than ever," he hissed. Then, mocking them, he took a puff from the same cigar and blew the smoke in their faces. In an instant, the brothers opened their eyes and found themselves back in the same room where everything had begun, where they had once torn their father's old papers. But this time, the paper was whole again, resting in their aunt's hands. They realized the truth at last. The only reason they had been sent into the past was to understand the true value of those papers, that they were not just documents, but a symbol of sacrifice, of survival, of freedom passed down by their ancestors. The aunt no longer kept it for herself. She handed it back to them, as if it now truly belonged where it had always meant to be, in the hands of those who would carry the memory forward. Back in their own time, the brothers were different men. They were no longer distant, no longer divided. They began visiting each other, living with a new bond, understanding that those papers were worth more than their own lives. But one day, Joel came to Jack's house. In a moment of childish play, Jack's little daughter grabbed the papers, tore them apart, and ran away laughing. Joel's heart sank. The brothers froze in shock. And with that, boom, the story ends. So friends, those papers were not just pieces of history, they were their very lives. And this is where our story closes. Tell us in the comments how you liked the journey. We'll meet again in the next video. Thank you so much for watching. Peace out.